That's good. This is on the kind of the organization. At the end of 2013, this committee's safety subcommittee looked at the problems contributing to PUC's safety oversight troubles. And one of the things we saw was kind of a committee-wide lack of organization. The PUC makes a couple of hundred decisions each year, and each decision has a number of ordering paragraphs. The commission will make several thousand orders through the course of a year, and yet it has no means of tracking those orders. This has, I believe, serious safety consequences as it moves forward. In a settlement following a triple electrocution fatality in San Bernardino, Southern California Edison, is to sample power lines to identify hazardous conditions and to research ways to lessen the danger from downed power lines. They were to allocate shareholder funds to do this. Is anyone monitoring that today, do you know? And it isn't mentioned in the PUC's zero-based budgeting as a responsibility that you brought forward to Senator Wolk's committee. The more that safety appears in PUC decisions, the greater the need to track those decisions. And we've been told before is that it was, you know, and kind of for at least 5 years, that it's an IT problem that needs to be solved in the compliance with ordering paragraphs or COPS or however it is to try to put it together. But are we getting closer to that, or the ability to look at that? And how much is it a priority to track those decisions and the ordering paragraphs that follow?
Okay, the short answer is yes. Myself and the Deputy Executive Director have gotten together in the last couple of days to figure out a workaround that doesn't involve the IT that will allow us to begin action right away. What we will do is we'll start logging the ordering paragraphs in Excel spreadsheets from each decision that we do now, and then we would check back with the operating division to determine compliance. So it's a new initiative. We're working out the details. I'm going to house it through the executive branch because it's cost-cutting and affects all the industrial divisions. Michelle, do you have anything to add on how we're going to do this?
Yes, there's a couple of things. First of all the divisions actually already have established a compliance officer, and they should be doing this tracking within the divisions. What we don't have right now is that centralized tool and the centralized ability to get reports out of it. So the process that we're working on now is trying to figure out how we can do that centralized procedure and Tim and I have come up with a workaround around our IT issue. It involves a small IT element that allows for reporting, but the big issue that we were trying to do was to automate the extracting the ordering paragraphs from decisions automatically and entering them into a system. But because of the complexity of the ordering paragraphs, which sometimes have numerous parts to an individual ordering paragraph, it became too complicated. And so we're figuring out a workaround around that complication, which will be much more manual in the input, but will give us the managerial reporting tools that we need to be able to provide that centralization that we haven't had historically.
On the other hand, even though it has all this manual component, we can get it up and running in 4 weeks, and it can serve as an ongoing basis. That's basically, we're looking for things we can do now. Rather than, we have structural IT issues, which I think we plan to propose in our strategic plan, a comprehensive address, but we can't delay action anymore. We seem to think there was going to be a centralized IT solution. It hasn't occurred, and we're just going to act.
You're not alone with the rest of the state government in terms of IT solutions.
It's a big issue.
But thank you for the answer, and I'm happy to hear that you're on top of it, and we'll be working through it. Final question, Mr. Chair, if I could, and that's on advice letters. You have, in looking at the annual report, there are about 955 advice letters last year, and it's the monitoring of those advice letters, and the PUC rulemaking set the policy, utilities try to implement the policy through advice letters and rate cases, and that authorizes the spending consistent with those decisions that are done. In many cases, though, there isn't a follow-through, and the policy pushed down to rate applications, so it's pushed down to advice letters, and they seem to be the first line of PUC oversight. But it's not clear that they're tracked, and there's not an easy way to really follow those. The PUC had to depend on utility reports for this information because it didn't track its own funding authorizations, as we know. So some of what the PUC has been criticized for, such as sole source contracting, happens in advice letters more than in proceedings. So I guess, how do you track advice letters to ensure they are consistent with commission decisions? And also, I noticed in looking at on your webpage that you have listed the advice letters are listed there, but there's no, they're not searchable. There's no way to locate them in any way other than seeing a list of the 16 to 302 that are on this particular page to try to find those. So I know it's probably frustrating, as I can see, but how do we look at doing that, and how can we track them better? How do you make sure that the letters of protest are accessible? And how do you make sure that the commission orders do not inappropriately punt rate decisions to advice letters that should be dealt with in the proceedings instead?
There's a lot of questions you have, and there's a lot of different answers. This was a focus of our managerial retreat last week, and we have some things we're going to wheel out. Michelle, it's sort of, you want to start off?
Well, let me start with one of the things that we know that we would like to do is to have all of the advice letters come in through an online portal like we have for the formal filings. All of our formal filings are 95% of the documents that come into the formal process come in through an online portal. They're stored electronically, they're available, and they're online. We want to have the same process for advice letters. We have a project actually proposed before Caltech right now that would allow us to get there in a few years. That's how long it takes to get any IT project through the state process. And so we have it as one of the things we're actively working on to get us to that point. So that's related to the ability to access the documents that are done through advice letters. You had a question about how is the follow-through on that being tracked, and so Energy Division is working in conjunction with Communications and Water to roll out some tools for that will support that kind of an effort.
Yeah, let me follow up on that. We plan to have a spreadsheet very similar to what we've done on the open cases. We plan to track each advice letter in a common format across the industries, create an Excel spreadsheet, and load it onto our website so that people can just sort of see where it is and what's going. The three industry divisions are working together, and they're going to follow a common format. It will come once again to the executive division, and then it will be posted. So that's what we're doing in that.
And then I think your final question was related to how do we ensure that decisions are being made at the right level rather than being pushed down to the advice letter process. And actually the advice letter process is governed by a general order that the commission has adopted and modified over time, over many years, that establishes different levels of decision-making delegation for advice letters. And so the idea there is that anything that's not ministerial has a higher level of review and in general has to come back before the commission for a resolution. So then is a vote of the commission. It's called a resolution rather than a decision, but it carries the same weight in law.
And then finally, we're redesigning the website. We will be rolling out something by the fall. The idea is to have two portals, one for consumers and one for more interested people like yourselves that would do that. The search engines, though, are a difficult issue, and that we're looking into. It turns out, well, this isn't the right place to talk about.
IT, we understand. And just to follow up, do ex parte reporting requirements apply to advice letters and in those any communications that would go on?
No, it applies to the formal proceedings that are designated.
Reflected.
Yeah, so the advice letters are considered implementation from the decisions, the formal proceedings. And
But are there
so,
communications that go on during the advice letter process that should be
so
after the letter?
there are communications that go on. They are done, again, through formal protests and comments on the advice letters and that sort of thing. And then those things are reflected in the resolutions of, how they were incorporated and that sort of thing. But the issue would be a similar issue that you would raise, for any communication.
Right, but there's no requirement for ex parte if there's
That's
something
correct.
that goes on in that.
I don't think that in the year a year and 1 month that I've been there, that anybody's ever talked to me about an advice letter. And most of the advice letters that I've actually reviewed have been follow-up to a proceeding. So, for example, when we do our long-term procurement, then people do an advice letter at the end of the process to say, here's what we actually procured consistent with your direction in the long-term procurement. And it's the staff vets it and they recommend it. And most of them that I'm familiar with have really, I don't know that anybody's ever talked to me about it.
I guess I'm just being skeptical that if an advice letter were used to game the system in the previous decision and using that to be able to implement a policy or rate that's not consistent, then that could be moved through without ex parte. And since you're, as you said, Ms. Cook, that you're monitoring that to make sure that then it would go back to a full hearing, then that would resolve the issue. So
Very well. Thank you.
Mr.
We're
Chair.
going to go to
Appreciate
Senator.
the consideration.
Thank you for your questions. Mr. McGuire.
Thank you so much, Chair, and do want to take a moment to say thank you for taking this important issue on today and for bringing us together and to all the work that has gone into today's hearing. Thank you so much. President Pickard, welcome, and good to meet you in person.
Yeah.
We had an opportunity to talk on the phone, and thank you so much for your work along with the executive team. What I'd like to be able to do, if it's all right, is to be able to offer just a few comments and then lead into some questions there. I've had most of my time dealing with the PUC has been as a member of the Board of Supervisors in Sonoma County. And we've had to deal with the Commission on local issues, in particular on water issues from private utilities. And these are my words, and Mr. President, you did not say it at all like this, but I think the frustration has been, and what we've remarked is that the Public Utilities Commission really should be rebranded as a Utilities Commission because, one, the evolving scandals that we're all very aware of with commissioners and their close relationships with the utilities that they're supposed to be regulating, and the extreme frustration regarding the lack of access for residents, regarding the daily operations and the rate cases the PUC is supposed to be advancing. And you talked about that. But first, I'd like to be able to talk quickly on the ex parte communications. And Mr. Sullivan, you discussed about taking personnel action,
Yes.
Particularly for staff, but many times those rules of conduct for personnel wouldn't necessarily go over to those 5 commissioners. So can you
Well,
talk
actually never, because the commissioners are subject to your oversight, not mine.
So I think what we've seen is a lot of the challenge has been not with all, but at least 2 of the commissioners thus far. And would love to be able to hear, heard a code of conduct, heard some additional ex parte rules. Is there anything specific that you want to be able to get into today to be able to discuss about advancing? Because I think that's been the challenges of looking at personnel. It doesn't get to the root of the problem on the commission.
Well, I agree with you. There are limits to what I can do as a president,
Yeah.
and I actually am trying not to be the kind of strong president in the same way that the previous president was. So the best that I can really offer you right now is that I am striving to build a culture of collegiality and of accountability and actual open discussion that's visible to everybody, that transparency. So I don't know what the investigators will find. I actually am depending on them because they are better investigators than I'll ever be. And it's probably somewhat ineffective or never going to be really comforting to the public if we do it ourselves. So in some ways, I'm comforted to know that we're getting that kind of scrutiny. And at the end of it, then there may be a way that you can take action, because you have the ultimate authority to impeach somebody because of their actions if it's warranted. You have to find cause. I don't have that authority, and to be honest with you, I don't know that I can do an effective investigation and try to build the kind of PUC I think that you would like to have us see.
No, I'm very well aware of the legislature's authority, and I know that there are 3 different individuals at the minimum on the state Senate side. They're going to be advancing, in particular, on the issue of ex parte communication. I just wanted to be able to get down to where we're discussing personnel rules. Really doesn't have anything to do with the commission. I think that is where the focus and the concern has been. And I'm sure that there is going to be some need on the personnel side, as you had mentioned, the 1,000 employees just in the city and county of San Francisco. Would like to be able to talk about another issue. And Mr. President, you had brought up how challenging it is for the public to have a say on issues that are in front of the commission. And I have to say, my own editorial is, it is an absolutely ridiculous process to become an intervener. On behalf of residents in Sonoma County, we had to bring county council in. It takes weeks, if not months, to be able to become an intervener. And it's clear that the public's role in the decision-making process, in my opinion, is an afterthought, and that the process is broken. So can you talk about your thoughts about how we can increase the public's role? And we've been so focused on rate cases as they advance, but so many residents don't have the means to be able to hire an attorney or an advocate. Can you go into that in your thoughts over the last year that you've been there on how to be able to open up and bring some transparency into the process, make it easier for the public to participate?
This has always been one of my frustrations. I think it was designed to actually give different levels of standing to different participants. You know, I think that it's designed that people who want to become interveners actually have a very special role that's not accorded to the rest of the public. That's by law. That's by design. That's by intent. Mm-hmm. And it is almost as if we were standing in for the legal system, and these people who are all plaintiffs before us. And so it is very difficult for the public, unless they want to sign on and build that expertise, to be able to file briefs, to be able to challenge other people's briefs, to be able to cross-examine witnesses, to be able to file challenges. I think it is inherently difficult for them, and just as it is for the court system. It's one of the reasons that I think the courts tend to defer to us on technical matters. And so the question of how we then create vehicles that have the same kind of impact for citizens and people in communities is a tough one. We are a legalistic organization. We are built on these kind of processes. And I think that my first set of steps is just to make it easier for people to understand. And I'll go back to our website. If you look at our website, we have our own legal nomenclature. And it inevitably confuses me that I can't tell what those numbers R.066.319-257 mean. It's unintelligible to me as a casual observer. I have to open up every one of those files and read 3 pages till I can figure out what it's about. How do we actually start to make it a little simpler for people to find those things? How do we actually say, here are the guiding policies in these different areas that the commission operates by, so that people at least have a general sense of where we're headed and what we expect to see in those, and then they can start to compare a little bit more easily whether the proceedings actually are headed the direction that we as the commission have set. It gives us tools as well to manage what we're getting from our staffs and from stakeholders. It may change over time. I don't think that any policy governance should stay forever. We need to monitor to see if it's doing a good job. But I think that those are the first steps. Make the information in plain language, make it accessible to people, make our website easier and less intimidating, start to talk to people who come as if they actually had a stake in it, and then start to devise other kinds of forums where we have feedback. We have some. Our public participation hearings are frequently well attended. Generally not. I've noticed that the rate hearings are, 20 people show up for one, and then it's down to 2 people who are essentially the interveners or other aligned parties. Everybody else kind of makes their statement and goes away. And that doesn't really translate into... Yeah. The other thing I think that we have to do is start to talk about these issues as commissioners in public.
And I want to get to that, and I think this is... and again, I know you've only been there a year, so I want to put that in context, right?
Seems like 100 years.
Yeah. So while not a perfect process, if an individual is able to go to their local city council and board of supervisors and comment on a rate case, they are most likely going to be listened to. What I've seen, at least in the district that I represent, is that we have among the highest water rates in the state. So in one district in particular, the highest wastewater rates in the state, among the poorest community in the state, with a one-and-done hearing in the poorest county in the state, and that's in Lake County. And there's no way a resident of Lucerne is going to be able to travel down to San Francisco for a final hearing. And because of that, and because you have to hire an attorney to be able to get through the process, and or an advocate, I don't believe that they have a true seat at the table. So, and I think that's...
I absolutely concur.
And it has to be fixed sooner rather than later, because I think what we're seeing in particular, it's bringing sunshine to that process, and we have some of the poorest communities paying among the highest rates in the state. We're on the same page, want to partner with you on that, because it is a significant challenge that's continuing to evolve in the wrong way.
Thank you, Senator.
I just have one more item, Mr. Chair. I promise I'll be done. And that is just on the issue of, and we had an opportunity to talk about this, and again, Mr. President, thank you so much, on 911 service in rural California. And here's the challenge, that federal rule, and it's the NORS reporting threshold, has a mandatory report in a community or an area, a region that has 900,000 minutes. And you have to have a 30-minute outage, and you get a mandatory call out. Residents know when utility is going to be there to be able to fix that service. Right now in rural California, that does not happen. So we had one of the largest forest fires in the last several years up on the North Coast. 911 service was out. And by the way, state wasn't aware because there's no mandatory reporting. And when folks try to call out, they couldn't get through. We're working on a solution to ensure that there's mandatory reports, a response time, and the other issue that we have communication boxes along state highways that a semi can take out, and it takes out a county and a half of electronic health records and point of sale displays, et cetera. Can you talk about what PUC could be on the horizon in regards to ensuring that rural California has the same representation of other areas of the state when it comes to 911 service?
I think that we have an obligation to continue to work with you. I will again confess that this is a new area of policy to me. I'm learning as I talk to people like you who can say, here's what the real issue is, what the real need. I am really aware of the difference in terms of the standards of service between rural areas and urban areas. No utility really wants to serve a very high-cost infrastructure area with low density of people who actually pay. And again, we have special challenges with telecom companies. With the gas and electric utilities, we can set their rates. For a variety of these other utilities, we don't set their rates. We have partial coverage. There are competing utilities that provide similar service who have even less regulatory coverage. So it's a challenge, and the best I can promise is I will continue to learn more, and we will continue to work with you till we find solutions.
What I'm hoping is that we may have a legislative fix that may be coming forward that we'd love to be able to work with you on. So,
And we'll do a proceeding and develop some ordering paragraphs and put it into our tracking system, make sure we actually follow through.
thank you so much.
I have two areas of concern that maybe you can answer succinctly or not, maybe you can. One of them has to do with adequate geographical representation. I think this really falls on the governor and the Senate, that we appoint people to the PUC that live in one geographic area. In this case, it's Northern California PUC. That's on us. I think that's something that I'm going to be more mindful of in the future. We have one appointment before us who is a very high-quality individual, but when you apply the test of a highly qualified individual from Southern California, again, that fails that test. I don't necessarily, I want to look at that. I want to also be somebody who takes action on geographical distribution, and that's going to be something that's going to be before us, and I'm going to be looking at that quite seriously. But I want to know if there's a commitment from the PUC to do something to be more accessible statewide. Is there something that you're working on? Is there something that you would like to work on? How can we get Southern California to have access to the PUC?
I've been asking this similar question of my staff and other staff, and one of the things that we traditionally have done is had business meetings in other parts of the state, but for all the reasons that we just talked about, very few citizens really want to come to our business meetings. It's arcane, it's, things are pretty settled. There's not a whole lot of opportunity for them to have real impact on what we talk about. It's also really expensive for us to actually have a formal business meeting. So what we've been talking about is doing more all-party meetings with more accessible formats and slightly less formal actions where we can bring up topics that are of interest to various communities that wouldn't otherwise see the PUC. We don't have to actually bring our own telecom equipment. We don't have to bring a lot of staff to make sure that it gets fed out onto the web. But we can actually get real quality input. And we can do it earlier in the process when it actually has a chance of having some impact on our proceedings. So we're looking at where that ought to be. We're looking at potential of doing something in Fresno later this year. I think that the Central Valley is important to me. I think we need to spend more time thinking about how we address the Central Valley. But I know that there's also Riverside and the Inland Empire that hardly ever gets to touch us either. And so I think that we have to wrestle with that. And I expect over time we'll get better at it, but I can't swear that the first couple are going to go great.
The next one deals with disconnection of service disconnections. I've seen data recently that shows a growing number of electric service disconnects for non-payment. And it's become alarmingly high recently as opposed to what it was in the past. Are you aware of this increase that's taking place? And does the CPUC regulate the circumstances under which the IOUs may disconnect electric service for non-payment?
We get a variety of different kinds of appeals. I believe that we have addressed it in some circumstances. I'm hoping, and most of my attention has been on the restructuring of electric rates, that hopefully will help people to be able to get cheaper rates, and particularly in the inland areas of the state where there's a differential with the coastal parts of the state. Mm-hmm. So I'll be honest, that's where I've focused my attention, but if you want to tell me more, I'll be happy to look into it.